In this video, I'll show you how to use the glass effect in Figma. If you want that modern frosted glass look, sometimes called glassmorphism, the good news is that Figma now has a built-in glass effect, so you don't have to fake the whole thing manually every time. Figma's Help Center shows the glass effect as an effect you can apply from the right sidebar, and in Figma's own example, applying glass automatically lowers the layer's fill opacity so the layer becomes translucent. Let's start from scratch. First, create a frame for your design. This works best when you already have something visual behind the glass, like a colorful background, a photo, a gradient, or a group of UI cards. The reason is simple. Glass only looks like glass when there's something underneath it to distort, soften, and partially reveal. If the background is just plain white, the effect will be much harder to notice. Now add the shape you want to turn into glass. Most of the time, that will be a rectangle with rounded corners for a card, a small panel, a modal, a floating toolbar, or a button. You can also use circles or custom shapes, but a rounded rectangle is the easiest place to begin. With that shape selected, go to the Effects section in the right sidebar. Open the Effect dropdown and choose Glass. Figma's official tutorial shows this exact workflow, and that's the fastest way to get the base effect onto your shape. As soon as you apply it, you'll notice the object becomes translucent. Figma says the glass effect automatically changes the layer's fill opacity, and in its own example, it drops the fill opacity to 20% by default. In practice, that means one of the first things you'll usually want to adjust is the fill itself so the panel is visible enough without becoming too solid. So after applying glass, go to the Fill section and fine-tune the fill opacity. A very low opacity will look lighter and more airy, while a slightly higher opacity will make the card easier to read. Figma's glass example increases the fill opacity after applying the effect, which is a good reminder that the glass look is usually a balance between the effect settings and the transparency of the fill itself. Next, adjust the glass settings. Figma's built-in glass effect includes controls like light angle, light intensity, refraction, depth, dispersion, frost, and splay. Those settings control how the light seems to move across the object, how much the background bends, and how soft or sharp the glass feels. In Figma's own walkthrough, all of those values are editable directly in the Effect Settings panel. Here's the easiest way to understand them. Light angle changes the direction of the highlight. Light intensity makes that highlight stronger or softer. Refraction controls how much the content behind the object appears bent or distorted. Depth changes the dimensional feel of the glass. Dispersion can add more color separation and visual richness. Frost makes the glass feel more blurred and diffused, and splay affects how that light and distortion spread across the shape. Those aren't separate tutorials in Figma's docs, but they're the practical visual roles those controls play when you tweak them on canvas. This part is partly interpretation based on the effect controls Figma exposes. If you want a clean UI glass card, keep it subtle. Usually the best results come from avoiding extreme settings. You want the user to feel the effect, not get distracted by it. If the background looks too warped, lower the strength. If the card disappears into the background, increase the fill opacity a little. If it looks too flat, adjust the light angle and intensity. Now let's make the effect look more polished. One of the best upgrades is adding a soft stroke. Select the same object, add a stroke, and make it very light, usually white or near white with low opacity. Figma's stroke controls let you choose the stroke color and opacity from the right sidebar. And this tiny border helps define the edge of the glass against the background. After that, consider adding a very soft shadow underneath the glass card. The shadow should not be heavy. The point is only to separate the object slightly from the background. This gives the card a floating feel without making it look like a solid block. Figma supports standard effects like shadows and blur in the same effects area, so you can combine them with glass for a more layered result. Another trick that helps a lot is using a gradient fill instead of a flat fill. Figma's own glass effect example uses a gradient fill before applying glass, which adds more realism and makes the object feel less flat. A gentle gradient with one lighter area and one darker area can simulate how real glass catches light differently across the surface. Now let's talk about the older frosted glass method because you'll still see it a lot and it's useful to understand. Before Figma's built-in glass effect, designers often created glassmorphism by using background blur on a semi-transparent layer. Figma still supports background blur, and its Help Center says you apply it from the Effects section in the right sidebar. It also notes something very important. To actually see a background blur, the layer's fill opacity must be between 0.10 and 99.99%. If the fill opacity is 100%, the blur won't be visible. So if you want a classic frosted panel instead of the newer built-in glass look, you can still do this. Draw a rounded rectangle, lower the fill opacity, then apply background blur. That will soften whatever is behind the card instead of just blurring the card itself. Figma specifically distinguishes layer blur from background blur, and that difference matters. Layer blur blurs the selected object, while background blur affects what sits behind it. There is one limitation to know here. Figma says you can only add one layer blur or one background blur to a layer. And if multiple layers with background blur overlap, Figma ignores the extra blur instead of multiplying it. So if your design has lots of stacked glass panels, don't expect the blur to compound the way it might in some other tools. If you want richer color behavior, try blend modes. Figma supports blend modes on entire layers, fills, and some effects. That means you can experiment with how the glass interacts with the colors behind it. For example, a subtle blend mode can help a tinted glass card feel more integrated with a vibrant background. Figma says blend modes can be applied from the appearance section for the layer or inside the fill settings for fills. For UI design, here's a simple working recipe. Start with a background that has color variation. Add a rounded rectangle. Apply the glass effect. Raise the fill opacity until the content is readable. Add a thin light stroke. Add a soft shadow. Then place text and icons inside the card, with strong contrast. That last part matters a lot because beautiful glass is useless if the text is hard to read. If your text looks muddy, the fix is usually not making the glass stronger. Instead, simplify the background behind the card, increase contrast inside the card, or slightly raise the panel's fill opacity. You can also reduce how chaotic the content behind the glass is, because busy backgrounds fight against legibility. One more useful thing. Figma supports smart animate with layers that use texture, noise, background blur, or layer blur effects. So if you're animating panels in a prototype and you're using the blur-based frosted method, Smart Animate can work with that setup. Figma notes this in its Smart Animate documentation. And if you plan to export to SVG, there's a limitation to keep in mind. Figma says background blurs don't carry over the same way in SVG export, and you would need to blur the layer directly instead. So for handoff or export, always test your result instead of assuming the glass will look identical outside Figma. So to sum it up, the fastest modern method is to apply Figma's built-in glass effect from the effects panel, then refine the fill opacity, light settings, and stroke. If you want a more classic frosted glass style, use a semi-transparent shape with background blur. In both cases, the secret is the same: a good background, subtle settings, and enough contrast for your content to stay readable. That's how to use the glass effect in Figma. Hope the tutorial was helpful. Subscribe to my channel and see you in the next video.